This is the Capitol Rundown.
Hi everyone, I'm Kara Sundlin. Welcome to the Capitol Rundown. This is where we break down the politics that matter to you from both sides of the aisle with our insiders, former Republican House Leader Themis Klarides and Democratic strategist Jimmy Tickey. Great to have you both back again. There's always so much happening in between our weekly shows. So it's almost like, where do you start? But I want to start where we just came off of Eyewitness News at noon. We were showing the markets. They're up a little bit today, but we've seen everything swinging again as people get nervous between President Trump's tariffs and the perhaps fight of, are you going to fire Powell, which today President Trump said he would never do that. And now we see the markets swinging again. So let's start with you, Themis. What are we to make with these economic swings that are sort of still making people very nervous?
Well, that's what I said from the beginning. His MO and his strategy in general is to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. You know, and I think I said from the beginning that half of it would be not legal, right? The other half would not really work out, you know, and then you have a couple things in between. I just feel like he did the tariffs, as we talked about, you know, recently, because it's really the non-tariffs. It's the VATs, it's the intellectual property theft, it's all of that. It's a leverage, right? And like Vietnam came back and said, okay, we'll go to zero tariffs, and they're like, too bad, because it's the other issues that you have to work on. And so I feel like he's wanted to scare people, and I don't think that's a bad strategy, but he shouldn't be scaring our people. He should be scaring the other countries. And I think the bigger issue here was there was bad communications from his office to explain to the American public how this was going to work. Was there still going to be stock market changes? No question. And would that still have scared people? No question. But I always feel like the more information people have, the better, and the more explanation in a very simple way, the better. So we've seen the stock market go up and down, up and down. Today we're up a little bit, and that's good. Today he's not going to fire Jerome Powell because he kind of figured out that he can't really fire Jerome Powell because he's already being sued for filing the National Labor Relations Board person. So that's questionable. And he wants to work with China. Of course he wants to work with, listen, this is not about just because I want taxes on China or tariffs on China. This is about, we don't want China to do bad things that we don't agree with philosophically as a country. And we want to be treated fairly trade-wise in this world, particularly with China. And that's what he wants to use as leverage for it.
So you think a lot of it is just puffing your chest out to get people to the table?
I think a lot of it is. I think, you know, there's always going to be policies we disagree on, and that's very fair. But scaring the American public, affecting people's 401ks, you know, and everything else, that's not the way to do it. I think this could have been done PR-wise and communications-wise in a lot better way to put the American public's mind at ease as to where this was going.
Jimmy, what do you have to say about the swings and everything that's happening in the last 7 days?
Well, it's all been very unnecessary, right? He began a trade war around the world. He saw tariffs increasing, and then we saw those reciprocal tariffs coming back to America, and that impacted Connecticut families and working families. And so you never really know what he's going to say or do any day, and so that kind of uncertainty, that kind of chaos is not good for the predictability of the markets. And Main Street is very much tied to Wall Street. When you see Wall Street, we lost over $5 trillion in Wall Street. That has a direct impact on people's savings, their nest eggs, their 401ks, what they think they were saving for themselves, for their kids, for their families. And so now people think, because of all this, which was so unnecessary, do I need to work a couple more years longer to see, can we come out of this stock market and get back the gains that we saw that we lost under President Trump? So just this sort of chaotic leadership really is unnecessary and ultimately impacts the consumer. These sorts of tariffs are a tax on the consumer when they see the price of goods increases. He pulled back on many of the tariffs, not all of them. With China, we're up to about 145% tariff. So we'll see what he does. But, you know, with the Fed chair, that monetary policy is supposed to be separate from political pressure. And whether he likes it or not, the Fed chair is an independent authority over the federal monetary policy in our country. And he does not have the oversight to just say, I don't want the Fed chair any longer. He should look at his own policies and how they're impacting working families rather than pointing fingers at others like the Fed chair.
So I'll ask you both this. Do you think he really wanted to fire the Fed chair Powell, as it seemed that he wanted that one in his Truth Social post, or between the two? Did he want to fire him?
Well, the Fed chair has a year left in his time, and I think sometimes he says these things, and I think instead of taking any sort of the blame for the weakened dollar that we have, it's a 3-year low for the value of the dollar, we have our purchasing power lowered in America, rather than looking at his own policies, it's easier to point fingers and maybe throw out there that he'll fire the Fed chair.
But let's remember, he appointed Jerome Powell during his first term. Biden then reappointed him, and so now he has 1 more year left in this term. Congress is the one that creates all of these agencies, the Federal Reserve, the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, the FCC, the SEC, the FTC, all these organizations, right? And they put them in the executive branch because that's where they belong. But some of them, the executive branch, meaning the president, has the ability to hire and fire, like the EPA secretary, but the Fed, they don't. Now, I would argue that there needs to be a real serious consideration as to which one of these should be independent and not. I would argue that environmental policy should also be independent of politics. In addition to the Fed, in addition to the SEC, in addition to the FCC, what's on our airwaves and that sort of thing. So I would argue that we pick and choose where the president has the ability to insert politics, and I don't think we should. And he understands that Jerome Powell knows what he's doing, and Jerome Powell has basically given us a soft landing and stopped us from going into an actual recession. And the fact that inflation really isn't where it needs to be, and lowering interest rates, because this is all what the president is upset about. He wants inflation rates lower. I believe he wanted to say, interest rates lower. He wanted to say inflation rates should be lower. Now, which one of us disagrees inflation rates should be lower? Interest rates.
Interest rates.
I say it all the time.
Right.
Sorry.
We all want interest rates lowered.
Right. No
and
matter
the
what
average
party you
person
are.
who's not an economist would be like, yes, I want things to cost less.
They don't know what that means. There are ramifications to that. Then people start spending more. Then inflation can go up.
Yeah.
And right now we're already on the cusp of inflation. So that's why this is a data-driven decision by Powell and his people. And I think it's the right decision for the time being.
Okay. So let's talk about some of these others. We're seeing protests right now. There's protests today at Yale University for a different reason about an Israeli politician coming. But there's also been some protests at UConn about ICE orders and visas being taken away from foreign exchange students. Wondering how this affects Connecticut if these policies come down that we are taking away student visas, how that's going to affect schools like UConn or even the workforce. What do Connecticut people need to understand about this, Themis?
Well, obviously, if we're taking people out of schools and sending them back to the countries where they were born, we're having less revenue, which could affect the certainty and the ability for these schools to raise money. We have it's not just students, it's professors, because they come over on these visas also on F1 and J1 visas, particularly J1s. And we all would like to think that when our kids go to school, they have this global experience, meet people from not just different states, but different countries, and collaboration with other countries. I think everything is going to be affected when these kids are removed. I mean, I think there's 22%, I think, of professors who are foreign-born right now in this country, and 5.6% of students who are foreign-born. Now, that doesn't mean some of those aren't citizens at this point, but I think it's a big issue, and I'm not saying, I'm not questioning whether it's right or wrong based on how they're making these decisions, but I think it affects them. I think it affects them monetarily. I think it affects them culturally, and I think it affects our colleges and universities.
Jimmy?
Mm-hmm. We are in a global economy, as we were just talking about, and that means that we really want our young people to be getting a global experience. And we have wonderful institutions right here in Connecticut, and it impacts both the students but also the professors. Some of our American students choose to go to other countries, whether that's for a school year or to go abroad for a semester. But other students from around the world might want to come to one of our world-renowned universities or institutions. And the same can be said for professors, where we might have world-renowned professors coming to teach our young people about a particular track that they might be pursuing. So again, the uncertainty that a student or a professor could wake up one day and understand that their visa might be revoked. And mind you, this is a short-term visa. This is to be able to be here for a semester, for a school year, or for a student's education.
Right.
This has often been kind of bipartisan, that we allow students to come to be educated in our universities. And we benefit from it in Connecticut by the professors that come through, from the institutions that have students from all across the world. And so by revoking the student visas, you are impacting that student's education, and you're also impacting then the whole institution. If you are losing professors, what are you going to do about class size? What are you going to do about offering those sorts of curriculums if the professors that were teaching them are no longer offered? So much like the economy, a thoughtful approach, thinking about how is all this connected and how are we treating students and the people that are here on these very short-term visas for teachers and for students, so that our Connecticut universities can meet the needs of students today.
Now, as we bring this all back home, because depending on what the news cycle is each day, you never know as we watch the stock markets and all of this. But we do know one thing in Connecticut, that we're going to be having a budget soon. The Democrats came out with their budget yesterday. We reported this on Eyewitness News at 4. It was about $55 million, and the governor thought it was too bloated. Republicans said it was fiscally irresponsible because it went beyond the guardrails. Where are we at? What do we need to understand about where we're going with this budget process, and what comes next, Themis?
Well, this is just the beginning, and we're going to talk about this a lot more in the next few weeks. But the governor puts out his or her budget, his in this circumstance, the beginning of February, which he did. Then the majority party puts out their budget, which they did yesterday. So now this is almost the starting point. It's almost like we're back to square one, because there will be negotiations between the governor, the Democrats, and the Republicans from now until the first week of June, hopefully. And there will be bits and pieces of everybody's budget in the final process. You know, for me, right now, what I do know is the Office of Fiscal Analysis, which is the nonpartisan budget office in the state capitol, has said that the budget that was put out yesterday by the Democrats has busted through all the caps. Now, I've explained these caps before. We have a spending cap, which means, you know, in language in your home, don't spend more money than you make. You know, a bonding cap, which means don't borrow more than you afford to pay back. You know, in simple terms, we have fancy names on the government level, but that's what you understand. You can't spend more than you make, and you can't borrow more than you can afford to pay back. We put these in place in 2017 budget, which was the best budget the state has probably ever seen, not just because I negotiated it, but because the Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate were almost even. So we had good ideas from both sides, but the most important ideas were these caps. And we were one of the lowest funded pension obligation states in the United States of America up until that point. Every year we kick the can down the road saying, oh, we have to fund our pensions, but we won't do it this year, we'll do it next year, we'll take some of that money and we'll put it over here, we'll take some of that money and put it over there. We have a flush rainy day fund, which is a budget reserve, so the extra money you have in your home budget. We have funded these pensions in a way that we hadn't in years and years. And that is because we have these caps. And I understand that there are all sorts of areas where people want extra money, but the answer is not, let's bust through these caps. The answer is find ways to save money. Find the bloat in government, like huge administrative costs and huge bureaucratic costs and money that is wasteful. It doesn't help you and me and kids. It doesn't help fund special ed kids. It doesn't help fund nonprofits. It just helps fund bureaucracy.
What Doge is trying to do at the federal level,
well,
I guess. But I know you don't agree with the chainsaw.
But in a responsible way.
Okay. And Jimmy, what are we in for, as obviously the Democrats just put out the budget?
Yes. So you saw the governor's budget several weeks ago, and now you're seeing the Democrats release their budget. And so it really is a jump-off point. This is now a conversation to be had. We'll see if the minority party puts forth their budget. And then over the coming weeks, we have until the first week of June is the state session to figure out what is our budget, to meet the budget, a balanced budget, meeting the laws that we have, but also meeting the needs of people today. And so you saw the majority budget did make further increases in childcare and in our nonprofit and social services, which have not seen an increase in a long time. And with so many of the threats from the Trump administration, really making sure that we continue to support our nonprofits and our service organizations that are adding value in our community. And then also increasing the special education fund and really helping local schools and local education. They also did bend back or cancel some planned raises. And so it's a budget by the majority party that continues to build upon the conversation that the governor started several weeks ago. And now we wait to see what is the minority budget. And then it's really all negotiations over these coming weeks and deciding what is the budget that we can get passed by the end of session, keeping in mind, because there is so much truly uncertainty by the federal government, not knowing what else might get cut, it's entirely possible that later this summer or in the fall, they might need to come back, the state legislature, into some sort of special session if they need to make any other edits, to that budget based based on any further cuts that we might see. For example, we know we've already lost almost $200 million in public health funding. Well, what is the state going to do about that? How is the state going to meet the needs of programs that people count on if the federal government is not giving us that help? As Themis said, we have made over $8 billion in pension payments. That is very good, and we will continue to do that. And we have an over $4 billion rainy day fund. And that is something to be considered as we are in this rainy day, as it would seem with the amount of cuts that we're seeing from the federal government to the state.
Yeah, I mean, it's really affecting people, right? I guess I always like to bring this back to the average person. I was getting my hair done the other day, and I think I told you guys this story, that there was a woman who actually is a conservative, but she's working downtown at the IRS in Hartford, and she's saying that she's seeing grown men cry because they're just laying off a ton of people, and many of them not even eligible for unemployment because of the way it was done with these emails. Are you doing your job? You're not doing your job. So are we expecting more hardship, I guess, that the state budget's going to have to make up because of these federal cuts of the people who they work here in Connecticut, right? So if they lose their job, that affects us.
Oh, absolutely. And I would think so. I mean, the charge from Elon Musk and President Trump was for congressional Republicans to cut $880 billion from the budget. That might be Medicaid, that could be other programs, but they were given the directive to cut from the federal budget. And what we have seen so far is it hasn't always been well thought out, but has been kind of broad brush, blindly cutting line items. We've seen food and nutrition programs in Connecticut cut. We've seen public health programs cut. And the anticipation is that there will be more cuts for Connecticut and other states. I will say Connecticut is in a better position than many other states having that $4 billion rainy day fund. So without that rainy day fund, we would really be in deep trouble. But at least it gives the state the wherewithal to be able to go if we had such drastic cuts that impacted our programs in Connecticut.
Are the federal cuts a reason to open the caps or the guardrails?
And that is why, because of that large amount in the rainy day fund, why it's very important to stick with those caps. Because we go back to a rainy day. I'm not arguing that we are probably in a rainy day situation now, and some of that money may be needed to be used going forward once we know really what the federal cuts are. Because now we have a lot of theories, and we have a lot of proposals, and things aren't done yet. Once we realize what that is and what we have to work with, and what we have to deal with, that is an argument to be made. But getting rid of the caps allowed us to have that rainy day fund that we didn't have before. I served in the legislature where we were almost down to zero in the rainy day fund, and these pensions were not being funded. If you work at a job and you are promised something, it's one thing if we decide policy-wise, you know what, going forward, new people that are hired, we shouldn't be giving them these kind of Cadillac plans. That's one thing, because you know what you're getting when you're hired. But if you're hired and you're working all these years and you're relying on raising your family and supporting your family and figuring out what your retirement is, and then you're not getting that money because the state's not being responsible, that's a big problem. That is a trust issue. I mean, our word is our bond. That's the only thing we really have. We can disagree on policies, but our word is our bond. So it's why it's so important to keep those caps and make sure that that rainy day fund is funded, and we are keeping our word to the people that we gave it to.
You agree with that?
Well, I certainly agree that the good news here is the budget that was negotiated, and I know Themis was a part of that budget, which allowed for us to meet the needs for decades.
Yeah.
Connecticut kicked the can down the road and did not meet our obligations with the pension plans and the pension payments. And under this governor, we have made over $8 billion in those pension payments, and we will continue to make those payments because those are our obligations. And then the question becomes, how do you meet this current budget? And that is the conversation, and that is the negotiation that will be happening with Republicans and Democrats and the governor's office to see, with the $4 billion surplus that we have, how do you meet the needs of the budget? Do you take a look at the spending cap? For example, for this year alone, the estimated surplus is about $1.6 billion. Of that, about half will go towards paying down the pension payments, a very good thing. The other half is usually going to the rainy day fund. Is that something that could be unlocked for use of funding the programs that would be cut by the federal government?
But the answer always seems to be, let's spend more. Let's not find ways to be more efficient. That's where the problem comes in.
What about tax cuts? Everyone wants to know, am I getting a tax increase or a tax cut? What do you expect for the people and their paychecks?
We're not going to get a tax cut if we're spending more. And this budget is between 5 and 10% higher than last 2-year budget in spending. And so that's the problem. If you keep spending more and you don't cut anything. Again, I agree. I don't want to cut nonprofits. I don't want to cut kid services. I don't want to cut, people that need our help. Because what is government's core role? To take care of people, their health, their safety, their well-being. Of course, that is our priority. But we never talk about, DOGE is one thing. That's like the whole hatchet versus the scalpel routine. But there is a lot of top-heavy, bureaucratic, administrative money that we are spending that can go to special education for kids, that can go to Medicaid, that can go to all of these interests and nonprofits and food banks and all these things that we really need to fund.
Keep in mind two things. Under Governor Lamont 2 years ago, we had the largest tax cut in Connecticut history, and working families saw that 2 years ago with that budget. And then also, money is money. So if we continue to invest in the special education funding and we are alleviating some of those costs for local towns and local schools, that is helping local towns, not passing on that tax and that fee to local folks. So if the state is increasing the amount of cost to our local schools and to the special education funding, that is less amounts of money that people would have to see come out of their local taxes. So how is the state addressing the budget? As we've talked about, this was the majority budget. This is a conversation starter, and we are
it's a wish list.
We are
first.
starting the conversation, and there will be the minority party budget, and then it will be all negotiations, because these are all the conversations that we're having right here that they will be having in the governor's office and in the Capitol over the coming weeks.
And as long as we're talking about Governor Lamont, he's the one that doesn't want to bust through the caps, and he's the one that believes that this budget is spending too much money. So, I think that there's going to be a lot to talk about and a lot of negotiations in the next 6 weeks.
And we'll talk about whether or not Governor Lamont's going to run again, but that's going to be decided in the next couple of months. So lots to find out. But anyway, thank you for our primer. Our goal is always to make sure you understand things at home, the politics that affect you from both sides of the aisle. So we appreciate both of our insiders helping us understand. I thank you both, Jimmy and Themis. All right, everyone, have a great day and be well. We'll see you for Eyewitness News at 4. And if you want to watch this, share it with your friends, listen again, just go to WFSB.com, click on local news. That's where you will find the Capitol Rundown.